alcoholic, and it is a great privilege tonight. I've been ever since we started this, it's grown and grown, and it just keeps getting better, and we just keep having really fun speakers. And every week, Kurt or Tom says, "Man, you got to get Don Quist. Have you called Don?" And I'm like, "Man, I try to call. He's got like 15 phone numbers and secretaries and all this stuff." And he would send me back a message. Maybe in a couple months, I'm booked up. I mean, it was like booking Guns N' Roses. So up until today or Tuesday, I was sitting there Monday talking to Tom, like, "Man, I don't have a speaker. This is giving me a headache. Everybody's speaking way out, but this week I don't have a speaker." And I just threw a Hail Mary on Tuesday. He's like, "Oh, you just wait, you'll get one." And I sent Don this long message qualifying who I am and that I know all these people and all this stuff. "Hey, Don, blah, blah, blah. I know Kurt and Tom, and I know we've reminded you a bunch, and they all want you to do this and think you're going to be so awesome. Will you do this meeting?" He goes, "Yes." And I go, "This week?" And it came back, he said, "Yes." And I'm like, "Tom, man, what do? I'm going to send a flyer right now. I'm going to link it to everybody he knows. I'm going to send a flyer, and I hope that's real." And I had the privilege of speaking with him today. I think his concern, which is a lot of people who haven't ever been to this workshop, they think, "Man, what kind of weird stuff are they doing there, man? They're not doing any kind of like weird kind of special like after graduate AA crap." And I had to assure him that the emotional sobriety was just the title to the essay. But without further ado, this man is very special. I think, everybody in their first year sober has ever been handed 5 speaker tapes. This is one of them. One of the most inspirational people I've had the privilege to meet. And Don, take it away.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Don Quist, and I'm alcoholic. Hi, everybody. After that, I'm going to light some of this medicine. I think I'm going to need some help. So I just offer this medicine for those who might want it, and for me who will need it, to use this help that we get from our medicine, something my grandpa taught me years ago. And so I would just like to say, I have, very briefly, I have 9 children. None of my children now have any issues ever with alcohol or drugs. All my kids are sober. And out of that, we have 20 grandkids now. And all my grandkids are also sober. None of them do drugs or alcohol. And last year I lost one granddaughter to heroin. She overdosed. And so anyway, I always look at the reason I think I got sober. One was my family was praying for me. I was really doing a lot of dumb stuff. There's a lot of prayers going on, and I think that I was married at that time, and my wife at that time, my first wife, she found Al-Anon. And I remember the weekend when she figured out what Al-Anon was about, because my life changed like you can't believe. A whole bunch of things that I was used to her doing, she wasn't doing them no more. And so I think the third is, I think the creator, said, I got a couple of things I want this fool to do, so I'm gonna do an intervention. I'm gonna help him get sober, because he's not gonna make it. And so I think that's what happened. And so what happened was I found you guys. I didn't know a lot about AA, but I'd heard about it, and so that was kind of I went there to find out what it was about. And I remember my very first meeting, I peeked in that door, and the first reaction I had, I said, "Oh my God," I said, "these are all white people in here." And I knew I was very prejudiced when I come into this program, although I didn't really think of that way. And I wouldn't even say my name or nothing. When I sit at that table, I go around and introduce themselves. I said, "I'm not telling these white people nothing." And so I didn't. But I remember a couple of things about the meeting. One was I couldn't believe that they were telling on themselves. They were talking about that they were selfish and self-centered, and they were going on and on. where I come from, you never talk like that, not in public. And the second thing that what went on that meeting that really bothered me was their laughter. It wasn't like he. I mean, it was belly laughing deep. They just get it on laughing. And I couldn't figure out why they were laughing. There was nothing funny about anything that I could see. And yet these guys were laughing about themselves. But the third thing that I felt there that I didn't know what it was for about a year was there was a feeling in there. There was just something went on with all that stuff. There was some kind of a feeling in there. Later on, I was to find out, I was to figure out that's that feeling that you get when you go somewhere and you belong. It's a feeling of belonging. It was sort of a tribal thing, I guess. It was like I come home. First time I come home, I sit there in that dang meeting with all these people, and I had this feeling, and it was strong enough that I wanted to come back the second time. I wanted that feeling again, and so that was kind of my role in getting that going. And then eventually, I was able to chit chat a little bit in their meetings, and eventually I got a sponsor and started to do some of the things that you guys told me to do. But just a 2-minute story is I was raised on a reservation in Wisconsin, Mohican Reservation. And my dad was an alcoholic, and boy, when he drank, he was mean. He was just a mean drunk. When he was sober, we just stayed away from him. But when he was drinking, it wasn't good. And he would do things like he'd come home drunk, and he'd pull us all us kids out of bed. He'd line us up, and he'd say, "I want to know who is it that left that sock on the floor." And my little brothers and sisters, I was the oldest one, so they'd look at me, so I'd step forward and I'd say it was me. So he'd say, "Go outside and you bring that switch that you want to get whipped with." And so I go outside, and I remember going out there. My mother, I remember walking by her, and she would just be in tears, silently, because he used to beat on her quite a bit too, you know. So I'd go out there and I get that stick, and I knew enough not to bring a rotten one. I learned my lesson on that. But typically it was one of these willow switches, and he had this funniest thing. He'd whip you till you cried, and then he'd keep on whipping you till you quit crying. You know, and a young kid, you know, that those willows, they leave marks on you. You get welts on there. And eventually, I learned, I remember a couple of times when he would be beating on my mother, I go take him on. I just a little guy, you know, I try to go do stuff to him, and of course, nothing happened there. But eventually I learned that there was this place, and in this place, he could whip me and I could go there and I wouldn't cry. No matter what he did, I would, I found this place. And so he whipped me till I cried until I quit crying. So I figured out if I didn't cry, the whippings was shorter. And that's kind of the way that they were. And so as a little guy, you know, I learned that. And so it was sort of that way when he was, we had back in our backyard, we had a bunch of old cars, and we used to hide food in there. So if his car wasn't home 5 o'clock, we knew it was going to be the weekend. And so we would, he couldn't ever catch us out on the side of those cars. We'd crawl out in and out the windows and through the doors and all that stuff, you know. So that's kind of the way that that it went for us on the res. And our family had a lot of secrets. We weren't allowed to talk about any of that stuff, you know, that went on. So anyway, that's kind of a background. And eventually I come into the program and into AA, and I found you guys. And I had primarily in the beginning days, I had three sponsors that helped me a lot. One was Frank McKibben, and I call him my head sponsor. And then Don Pritz, he took me through the work, and I call him my heart sponsor. And then I run into a man named Johnny Looking Cloud, and he was the one that taught me to add our culture to the AA program. And with Frank, he was by the big book, and it wasn't the 12 and 12. He said Bill Wilson wrote the 12 and 12 to make money, and he was doing Drunk with Timothy O'Leary. Don't bring that junk book here. Don't talk to me about it. And so there was never no discussions with him about that book. And the other thing that he was pretty adamant about going through the work was I remember one time I went there and I was talking to him about, some feelings, and he said, the book doesn't talk about your feelings. He said, the book says you wake up in the morning, you ask God to direct your thinking. He said, you don't wake up in the morning, you ask God to direct your feelings. And he had this way of being sarcastic, the way he would talk like that, and he quote the big book on where all places that talked about directing your thinking and not your feelings. And so I kind of went through the work that way. And when I got through that first pass through the steps, I knew my inventory was good. I had stuff in there. I never ever shared about my sexual abuse that happened when I was 9 and 10 and 11 by an uncle, and that was really paralyzing, that sexual abuse. And I kind of when I got out of my fifth step that first time, all of a sudden I started having these weird feelings coming up, and I didn't recognize what in the heck was going on. And I was really close to my sister, and she lived in Denver then. So I go have coffee with her, and I would describe what was going on in my head. And she'd say, she said, when you have that feeling, that's the way it feels. That means that you care. That's what that feeling means. And I thought caring was when you did something for somebody. I didn't know there was a feeling with it, because by the time I got to this program, about the only thing I had recognizable was anger. I was just one angry person. And I was fortunate enough to get a sponsor who understood that the first time, through the work. And so I remember, I guess each time you have somebody take you to the work, there's this little memory you have of them, And I remember when I was writing the inventory, I thought I was writing the truth about myself, and oh my God, just the stuff that I'd done sexually and physically and hurting people and all kinds of stuff, and I thought I was writing the truth about myself. And I always remember Frank told me, he said, no, he said, what you are writing is the truth about the lie. That's what you're writing. In that third column, when you look at something that hurts, threatens, or interferes with your self-esteem, and you put that in there, that's the lie. That's not the truth. And so that really helped me to get through writing what I needed to write about in that inventory. And I went through that, and I made my amends, and I did that. Then next, I went through the work with Don Pritz, and that was a whole different experience. That one was about feelings, and it was about love, and that's where I kind of learned there was just two thought systems. One is love and one is fear. And so the work was about understanding where my thinking was in each of those two systems. And that started to get things a little bit clearer. And I think I was about 3 years sober, or maybe 4 years sober. And I was doing this fifth step with this guy. And we were talking, through the fifth step. And he told me, he said, have you noticed, he said, you started drinking when you was a teenager, and he said, you had never grown up and you're 40-some years old. He said, you're an old guy, but you're acting like a teenager. He said, look at how your inventory is, and look at how your step one is. He said, you're just like I won't play basketball with you. Whoever I was mad at, all my friends had to be mad at the same one, and just this crappy junk. And my wife and I was married, and I wouldn't talk to her sometimes 2-3 weeks, no matter what she said. I just wouldn't say anything. But I didn't know I was acting like a teenager, because I'd always been that way. And so basically what he said is, he said, you're going to have to grow up. He said, you're sober all this long, and he said, you haven't grown up. He said, you're still acting like a teenager. So I- it was confusing, but each time I went through the work, I learned something, that I didn't know before. And I always remember Johnny Looking Cloud. I was at his house one time, and he had this table that he put underneath his window. It's kind of a narrow table, and he had they're called river rocks. They're flat and they're round, and he painted black on one side and white on the other. And he had all different sizes of these stones. And I asked him one time. I said, Johnny, I said, how come? What do these stones mean that you have on this table here? And he said, well, he said, when I go through the work the first time, he said, all I could see was the big stones. So he said, I turned from black to white. So you take all these stones, the big ones, and he turned them over because he'd say, that's what I thought was everything. Then he said, later on, maybe a year later or so, all of a sudden I'd have things bother me, and I'd realize when I went through the work, now the smaller stones, that was my big stones. So he said, I put these stones on there for me to remind myself I'm not done. I may not have found everything. And so I always remembered that because I could relate to that. Because when I went back through the work later on, I found stuff I didn't see, the first time. And so that was sort of how that was for me. And so when I started working with Johnny Looking Cloud, things changed for me. And we had this one talk. I went up to his place, and I was 3.5 years sober. And I don't know what happened. My meetings got stupid. My sponsor got stupid. I couldn't read no more in the big book. My 11th step was like a rosary, It's like, oh, right in the morning, I got to direct your thing, diversity, take from self-pity to silence, self-seeking motives. I just wanted to say I did 11th step, but I wasn't doing it. I just breezed into it really fast, or I would do it, on the way to work or some stuff like that. And I really felt I was going to drink again. That's how it seemed. And so I went up to see Johnny Looking Cloud, and he said, we've been watching you. He said, we talked and we didn't think you would make it. That's what the consensus was. You were so angry and so disconnected and so lost. We thought you're not going to be one of those. But he said you did. He said you didn't make it, and you're going through this thing. But he said it's time now. He said for you to learn about the culture. He said the things that your grandpa taught you. He said. Uh, he said there's things that's inside of you, and he said inside of a salmon there's a blueprint, and it makes that salmon do all the things that salmons do. Inside of the moose there's a blueprint that's what makes the moose act like a moose, and inside of a flower there's a blueprint that makes that flower be who it is. And he said that's the same way with you. So he said inside of every human being is an innate knowledge of your own well-being. He says what these 12 steps do, they help you discover this blueprint of the human being that you have. And a lot of times when he talked, I would nod my head, but I didn't understand for sure what he was saying, because a lot of this was very, very new. And so he told me, he said, when you started drinking, he said, that's like drifting out in space. And he said, you left the earth. And he said, what these 12 steps are, is there are 12 gentle ways to bring you back from being lost out in space to come back to be in harmony with Mother Earth. He said, that's a way to look at what these 12 steps are. And so he said, what you need to know is everything on this earth, it has a cycle, it has a season. And so he said, recovery is like this too. And he said, for the alcoholic, the human being, he said, our season is 4 years. He said, you come into AA, your first year is like a spring. You're just budding. The second year, those buds unfold and you kind of get a shape of who you are. The third year is like fall, harvest fruits and nuts. And then he said the fourth year is like a winter, like a tree loses all its leaves. So he said every 4 years, as he said, that's why you're here. That's why AA got all messed up. Your sponsor got dumb. The big book got dumb. You can't do nothing. He said, because every 4 years you go into a winter time. And he said, during the winter time, there's 3 questions that you can't answer. One is, he said, you don't know, who am I? The second question you don't know the answer to is, why am I? You don't know your purpose, you don't know your identity. And the third question is, you don't know where you're going. And he said, that's why you're acting so weird. And so what he said is, in the steps, he said, it helps you find yourself. And he called it locate. So he said, the way that the mind works is, it's like an airplane going from New York to Seattle. As that airplane flies, it's really only interested in 2 pieces of information. One is, where am I now? You don't care where it come from. It wants to know, where am I now? And where am I going? Those 2 pieces of information allows it to locate. It knows where it is and knows where it's headed. And he said, that's what step 1 and step 2 is. Step 1 is, where am I? You find where you're at. And step 2, that's where am I going? Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could. And then he went on to explain to me that the steps are all interconnected. Even though there's numbers to them, that's not how they work. They're really, spiritually, they're all interconnected steps. And he said, step 2 will set your intent for step 10. So that's like turning on a flashlight in the dark and it hits step 10. Now you got to go do the work. It guides you, you see, as you head for step 10, which I didn't understand what that meant, but I just nodded my head and did, what he told me I would do. And so one of the things he explained to me is, he said, the earth is an interconnected system. Everything is interconnected, interdependent with one another. And so the tree, it needs to have water, it needs to have wind. And he talked like this, explain how everything. So he said, the way that you are is, you are wired for connectedness. The way that the Creator made you, you are wired to connect. And he said, the way that you was raised is, he said, your head rewired you for protection, not for connection, but your head did something else. And so it made you withdraw, not talk to nobody, because of the way that you were raised and things. So you rewired your mind in a way, and you built for connection. And he said, what these steps are going to do is they're going to help you go back to connectedness. That's the way it's going to go. So then what he had me do next is, he had me take the 12 steps and put them in a circle. Steps 1 through 3 in the east, steps 4, 5, 6 in the south, 7, 8, 9 in the west, 10, 11, 12 in the north. Steps 1, 2, 3, that's where you find your relationship with the Creator. 4, 5, 6, that's where you find your relationship with yourself when you do the inventory. Step 7, 8, 9, when you make amends, now you start to connect with your relatives. You make your amends, you're starting to sit right. There's people that you hurt. And then 10, 11, 12, now you're back in harmony with the earth. This is the way that you spoke to me about. So I would put him in a circle, but I didn't understand all what he was saying. I just kind of did what he told me to do. And so what I found out was that was true. Step 1 helped me to locate. Step 2, that helped me to get some direction. I started to feel like connected, or started to feel, like I belonged. And so going through all of that, I still was a teenager, even though I was old. And even though I was sober for, a few years now, I was still that way. And I relate some to what Bill Wilson's essay, what he wrote there. I understand about some of that, because there were times in a big book where I would ponder on things, like it would say that I'm self-manifested in various ways. And the way that it was explained to me, they said, inside your head, there's a control room, has a door, and outside that door, there's a bench. That's where your committee sits. So you got Don, the husband of, and you got Don, the father of, and then you got Don, one of the boys, and Don, the worker, and then you got Don, the spiritual person when certain people are on. You got Don, the whore, when nobody else is around. And so this whole committee sitting out there, and then you have self-righteousness is sitting out there, and anger, and all those committees are sitting out there. So what happens is, on the left side in a control room, that's where all the automatic stuff is, the little heartbeat, you see that thing going up and down, and but on the other side, that's where the switches are. And so my eyes will see something going on, and I start to get irritated. So irritation comes in a control room, and it only has access to certain switches. So it hits the button, hits the switches, and I start to get pissed off. So it goes back to the door and it says, "Hey, Anger, come on in here. I think I got him going." So Anger walks in there with his toothpick and, "Oh yeah, we can do some stuff here." And so he flips the switches that he has, and I get all pissed off. And then they call in, "Hey, self-righteousness, we need you to come flip some of the switches." And so he comes walking, "What's going on?" And pretty soon I'm self-righteous and I got all this stuff going on. And that's what I understand self-manifested in various ways means. So in some ways I was like an octopus, I would talk this way in front of the guys, but my wife come along, I change the subject. I want to talk like that. And then, so I was an actor, just like the book says. I was, depending upon which committee member was in that control room, so I was like an octopus, like I had a relationship octopus, and I had to have it hooked onto something. I would hang on to a sick one until a good one come along. And when a good one come along, I go take it up and hook it onto another one. But I had to have these things connected, And so I can understand this dependency thing, but I didn't know what that was early in my sobriety. But I learned that's kind of the way that it was. So then I started to talk to Johnny Lookcloud about how do I grow up? I said, if I was grown up once, I would know how to go back and be grown up, but I had never grown up. I was always like this. And so I asked him, I said, in the old days, did we have these kind of problems with ancestors and when our community said, no, he says, we didn't have those kind of problems. He said, because we knew how to grow up. We knew how to grow up. We always grew up being mature. He said, what you are is you're immature. And so he said, when we taught everybody to grow up, he said, there was a teaching called the cycle of life. Baby, youth, adult, and elder. That was the cycle of life. And he said, the very first from when you come out of the womb, he said, that's really a big transition for a little baby. And that baby is looking, it was safe in the womb. So when he comes out, it's looking for that same safety. And so what happens is the first 4 years, spring, summer, fall, winter, there was something that child needed to learn. And so he said, altogether, by the time you grow up to be an old person, there's 8 feelings that you need to experience, 8 of them altogether. They get in 4-year cycles. And so he started to talk to me about the native teachings, and this really started to give me a different insight on the 12 steps of AA. And when I read the big book, all of a sudden it had a different understanding because of the way he explained things to me. So he said, when a person grows up, we grow up in 4 directions: emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual. So all 4 of those directions, like in a circle, say you have emotions in the east, then you have mental in the south, physical in the west, and spiritual in the north. All 4 directions must be involved. Well, kind of the way I grew up with emotional, mental, physical, but very little spiritual. And so I just kind of grew up. The way he described that is that's the ego's territory. Leave out the spiritual, emotional, mental, physical, that's the ego's territory. It knows how to work that. So he said, you got to understand this, is that there's 4 directions. Some people, we grow up and some people have like brown hair and some have blue eyes. There's some DNA, whatever they call it. There's something makes you who you are. And he said, then your mind is that same way. So some people, they will come out and they will be primarily feelings. Now, every thought has four directions: emotions, a feeling that triggers a mental picture, that trigger is by a physical language, and then it has a spirit and meaning behind it. So there's four directions for a thought. And so some people, their thought is feelings, and you can always tell them because, oh, it doesn't feel right. Well, that feels good. They always talk about how something feels. Then you have other people, they get a different take, and what happened is they're visual. And so when you hear them talk, they'll say, oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, I saw that. So they speak like what they see. Then you have that third person from the physical side, they're hearing. So they don't feel, they don't talk about it feels right. They don't say, I see what you're saying. They say, I hear you. I'm just really, they're like kind of dull. I'm really excited about what I'm going to go to a football game. Yay, yay, yay. And the feelings of people and the hearing people, the visual people, they go, get a life, But you can imagine everything is about relationships. So what happens when you have a feelings person talking to a visual person? So the visual person is describing something. Do you see what I'm saying? And that feelings person will say, that doesn't feel right to me. It don't have a damn thing to do with feelings. I mean, can't you see it? So then arguments, you see, take place. So we need to know we're different. And so I started to even work with sponsees differently. I started to see, I'm kind of a visual person, but they're not necessarily that way. So I had to back off. I had to, because it's about relationships. The way Johnny Cloud told me, everything is about relationships. So that was one thing I had to learn. Then he talked about these 8 feelings that I was to develop. A little baby develops these. So the very first feeling that a human being needs to develop is something called a sense of trust. Understand that the world is it's interconnected and it has laws and cycles, and the salmon swim just when the bear wakes up, and it's a big interconnected, coordinated system. So the salmon's got to trust that when it's supposed to swim, it's going to have food. So what we're supposed to develop, the very, very first feeling is the basis for our relationship, is a sense of trust. And so what I learned from him was these 8 feelings I was to take into step 1. So he helped me to design the scale, just kind of easy one, on a scale of 1 to 10. So on a scale of 1 to 10, when I looked at where was my level of trust, for the most part, it was about a 3. I didn't trust no one. I didn't trust God. I didn't trust women. I didn't trust white people. I didn't trust. I had very, very little trust. I didn't trust myself. And so you could see when you don't have trust, can you see, but I would be making immature decisions later on. When things popped up in my life, if I don't trust, then I can see why I wouldn't grow up, why I was trying to stay protected. I was not trying to, to get that level of trust out there. And so what I learned was that I didn't know the first time through the work was I had to take a look at my level of trust. Then the second feeling, once you get that, is a feeling, and it's called autonomy. And this you'll see like with 2-year-olds. Those of you who have kids, you can remember the 2-year-olds. When the 2-year-old has this feeling that they're developing, they do so by breaking away from the parents. They don't mind them anymore. The 2 most favorite words of a 2-year-old is no, And a 2-year-old would be just like a teenager if they could just drive a car. Just no, they're just belligerent like that. But what happens is that is God's way of teaching the human being to have this feeling to make choices and decisions later on in your life. You got to be able to have that no, It creates like a feeling of independence. You have to have that. So if you don't get that feeling, then what'll happen later on in life, you'll be wishy-washy. You can't make choices and decisions later on. And so somebody will say, hey, you want to go out to dinner? All right. What are you hungry for? Whatever you want, that's where we can go. Well, do you want to go to a Chinese restaurant, or do you want to, oh, what you pick it. So they can't make choices and decisions. And so what he was telling me was, where is it do you, on a scale of 1 to 10, in step 1, where do you have this feeling of independence? Well, I didn't have a strong feeling of that because my dad is the one who made choices and decisions. Is whatever the hell he said, that's what you did. You didn't sass him, you didn't boss him, you just did what you were told, even though you were very, very little. And so what he began to show me was the reason you're acting like a teenager, even though you're an old guy, is because in the old traditional way, you are not developing these feelings. And so the next one is what happens from about 4 to 8 years old. And it's at that age, you'll see how kids will have like pretend animals. But what they're doing is they're creating imagination. And then later on, that's for problem solving. And so you would not, where I was raised, you would not have any kind of imaginary friends. If you started talking to yourself, they put your ass out and have you chopping wood or something, So anyway, there's that feeling. Then when you get to about ages 8 to 12, you're supposed to have this feeling of accomplishment, being good at something, being good for something. The way my dad was, and it wasn't just me, all my siblings, we were never good enough. I don't care what we did, what we tried to do, it was just never good enough. And so I grew up into adulthood thinking I'm not good enough. And so can you see, if I had that feeling where I would be making immature decisions, I'd be trying to stay in that protection thing. Then once you get past that 8 to 4-year-old, then that's where you have the teenagers. And this is identity. This is where you kind of answer those 3 questions. Why am I? Who am I? Where am I going? And this is the second time you break away from the parents, as we know. Those of you who have teenagers, you know exactly what I'm saying. They become little rebels and stuff like that. And so once that's done, you get to the next age, and it's called intimacy. And this is a feeling that you're supposed to develop that allows you to build relationships. You'll be able to connect with other people. Then the one after that is called generativity. This is one where you get this feeling by being a giving person. Now, I never had much trouble with generativity because my mother was a very giving person. So we were always with her, and she was giving, doing things for people. And then the last one is called integrity. And integrity, you no longer are a committee. You are the way in front of your wife, you're that way in front of your kids, you're that way in front of the guys, you're that way. You're not multiple people anymore. You're just you, no matter, you see where you stand. And so he had me take those areas into step 1, and then that was my unmanageability. Then I had to bring that to step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves. What do you think would need to happen to get me to go from a 3 to a 8 or 9 in the area of trust? Is that possible for me to get that going? So in each of those 8 areas, I had to take a look at, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could. Because he said, that's the reason that I'm immature, is my blueprint had the 9 and the 10s. How I was acting was the 3 and the 4s. And so I wasn't growing up. I didn't know it because it always been that way. And then a part of that is in our native communities, we have something that happened to us that didn't happen to a lot of people, and it's something called the intergenerational trauma. The government years ago took the kids away from the parents by the thousands, put them in boarding schools, and they took away any knowledge of culture. They were going to integrate them back into the dominant culture. But in the boarding schools, there was whipped, there was sexually abused, there's a whole lot of things that went on by the thousands that this happened to. Now, nobody knew this was going on. Government didn't say you don't learn it in school. So my parents both were the product of boarding school. My mother was sexually molested in boarding school by one of the staff people. And I remember my dad, when he passed on, I was with him in hospice. And he woke up one night, he was in a coma, and he woke up and he wanted to talk. And I wasn't prepared for that. So I asked him, I said, Dad, I said, I was trying to make conversation. I said, Dad, where did you go to school? He says, oh, I went to the mission school. He says, where you went when you was a little boy. And I said, oh, I said, what was that like? And he said, there's two periods in my life that I don't talk about to nobody. I never have. He said, one is Normandy. He was a medic and he went with the first wave of when the people went on Normandy. And the things that he saw and the things that he experienced, he was just terrorized. He could not ever talk about what he saw. And then he said, the second thing I don't talk about is the boarding school. He said, I can't tell what happened there. And so I pushed him on that. I said, Dad, I said, Dad, was you sexually abused at that boarding school? And he started to cry. And I said, well, who did it? And he said that the teachers, he said the priests, they would, you had to take turns going to where they were at. And he said, it really screwed me up. He said, what went on there? He said, all you kids hate me. He said, because I don't know how to love you. He said, I've never been able to connect with you guys, as he said, because of what happened to me in that boarding school. And I remember I had never heard him talk this way, and he and I never got along very well, even though he got into sobriety later on. So what I did was just an impulse. I just I put that railing down in the hospital he was at, and I climbed right in bed with him. And I just put my arm around his neck, and I just pulled him into my chest. And I said, Dad, I said, you were just a little boy. I said, that wasn't your fault. That wasn't your fault, what happened to you. You know, I said, I just can't believe, you know, it just happened to you. So I got all my brothers and sisters together the next day. And I told him, I said, I found out why Dad was like how he was. I said, so I want to tell you that. So I made them, because I'm the oldest brother, I was kind of like the parent in a way. When I grew up, I was the one bossing my brothers and sisters around. So I made them all go up there, and I have an eagle fan. And so what I did was I had each of them put their thoughts into that fan and into Tappy's heart to talk to him. Because I learned from the elders, they said, when you have that terror in you, it's very hard for you to cross over to the other world. You struggle because that hurt is kind of holding you back. And so one by one, I made them all go and set themselves right with him, you know, in just in their mind and their thoughts. And next morning, I was sitting there in 12 geese flew right by the window like that. And I looked back and he passed on. And I just connected that that was our program, in that he was ready to make that journey, you know, thanks to that program like that. And so what I worked on then in the work was to work on the cycle of life. I worked on gaining trust, and I asked the Creator to show me how to become a trusting person, and how to gain knowledge in those 8 areas. That's how the old people did it a long, long, long time ago, is how they grew the human being in those 4 directions: the emotional, mental, physical, spiritual. And the steps, helped me to gain that knowledge on how to do that until it's not that life is perfect these days. I just celebrated 42 years of sobriety, thanks to all you guys. And I'm probably not telling you anything you didn't know already, because it seems everything I know you guys taught me, what it is. And so what I've learned is using the traditional knowledge. There was a guy in there's a tribe in Wisconsin called LCO, and there's a guy there, and he said him and some of his friends, I think he spoke at the Canada World Convention. And anyway, I have his tape, and he said he and some of his friends, they wanted to go to Founders Day. And so they got in their old car, a bunch of them, and they went down there. And by then, Dr. Bob had passed on and Bill was still alive. And so they were meeting out by the gravesite. And so he said they were waiting for more people to come. Buses were showing up and everything. And finally, Bill Wilson said to him, he said he pointed at me and he said, "You're a Native American, aren't you?" And he said he looked around to see who the heck Bill Wilson was talking about. And he was talking to me, he said. And he said, "Yes, sir." He said, I'm a Native American. I'm sober too, he said. And Bill Wilson said, "Good." He said, "There's something I want to talk to you about when everybody's gone." He said, "Would you mind waiting? And I want to tell you something." And so he said he didn't hear a word that was said. He couldn't believe he was going to meet Bill Wilson in person. And he said his mind was going and he was thinking, "I wish I would have wore something else," and all that kind of crazy thought that you're going. But finally everybody left. And he said, "Bill Wilson, come over." And he said, when we put this program together, it wasn't easy. There was a lot of struggling went on. And he says, when we put these 12 steps together, he said, it wasn't working. It wasn't working. And then he said, somebody told us you need to go talk to the Native elders. And so he said, we went and we met with these Native elders, and they told us about how to put the spirituality into these 12 steps. And so he said, that's why the 12 steps work. He said, those old people told us about the spirituality and how to add the spirituality to those, to those 12 steps. And it's not to say it's not a Native program. He was just relaying what Bill Wilson told him, about the power in that. And I got that clip on a short DVD video, because so many in our Native communities, we say AA is a white man's program. I thought it was a white man's program. And so when they say it's a white man's program, I say, I want you to listen to this little bit of this tape. It's about 4 or 5 minutes, won't take long, but I want you to listen to it. And every time that I play that, it just knocks that belief all to hell that it's a white man's program, because they hear what the story was, that was told about that. And so that was what I saw. So this is how I look at emotional sobriety. I think that the emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, I'm primarily a visionary person. I learned very early, the first pass through the steps, about feelings. I didn't have any that I recognized, but the steps gave me those feelings. And I always say this, is that I never knew the strengths of our Native culture until I come to AA, until I got through the 12 steps. They taught me the culture. They taught me the power behind the spirituality and this power behind our medicine, and things like this. I learned, my grandpa told me those things, but I never really experienced what that power meant until I got into these 12 steps. And so I made a vow, I made a vow after my first fifth step, and I was told to go and review those promises and the first step promises. And I was told that all of the odd steps has a set of promises, but all promises have a condition. They're not like free. And so I had to look at those promises, and if you meet the condition, then you claim the promise. That's how I was told. Withholding nothing, then you get the spiritual cookie. If you withhold something, no cookie. You don't get the deal. But you got to take a look at withholding nothing. And I did, I told everything. That first time through, that was the big rocks that I knew about. And so when I went through, I just would read that sentence and I could look the world in the eye. I used to always walk my head down. I don't walk my head down no more. I hold my head up, you know. It wasn't that way. And so one by one, I read those promises. And when I got to the bottom of them, I made a vow. I couldn't believe that I was free of that sexual abuse. I couldn't believe that. And I think one of the powerful things I learned in steps 8 and 9 was I learned about forgiveness. I didn't believe in forgiveness. I believe in getting even, then you forgive. That's how I looked at it. And I learned there's 4 directions of forgiveness. In the East is your normal forgiveness, like you bump into somebody. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Then in the South, there's forgiveness is called forgiving the unforgivable. That would be like one like domestic violence or sexual abuse or things like that. And that's tougher than the first one. The third forgiveness in the West is the forgiveness of yourself. Sometimes that's the hardest one of all the forgivenesses. You ever just get drunk and do something stupid and then it's irreversible? You can't talk your way out of it, not the next day. It's just something you got to figure out. And that's that forgiving yourself. And then in the top, there's a type of forgiveness that you do the forgiveness to set the spirit of the other one free. It's sort of like you and this person have a problem and you go in the grocery store and you're walking down the aisle and here they come down the aisle the other way and they see you and they turn, they walk away because of what they've done. Well, it's that type, you make an appointment with them and you go do the forgiveness thing to set their spirit free. It's a type of, forgiveness. And so I'll just kind of close with this is in step 2, when I was probably about 5 years, 6 years sober, maybe, Johnny Looking Cloud, he told me, he said, I want you to do something different in step 2. He said, I want you to take a long-term look to think about your relationship with the creator. How do you want to be? And so we talked, he told me what that meant. And what it came out with is I said, okay, what I want to be is I want to be a peaceful warrior. That's what I want to be. I want to know peace. And I want to be a warrior spirit. I want to fight, but fight with peace. And so I was a very angry person. And so people would kind of laugh at that. I said, I don't think you're going to be a peaceful warrior. You're an angry mother, you know. I don't think you're going to be able to do that. But we worked on that. So then he would say, every year when you go through the steps, when you come to step 2, come see me. I'm going to give you an assignment for 1 year. And so I would go see him. I get to step 2, I go see him and we would talk and he'd say, okay, here's your assignment for 1 year. And then he would give it to me. And I remember the first one he said, after we talked, he said, okay, for this year, he said, I want you to give up the need to understand why. And I looked at him, I said, well, why? And he just grabbed his head, covered his ears like this. He just walk away, mumbling to himself, don't talk to me, don't see me or whatever. But every year he would give me another thing to work on. 1 year he come to my place and he said, this is your assignment for this year. And it's in my house. He said, you have a marker? And I said, yes. And he took that marker and he wrote the prayer St. Francis of Assisi. And he couldn't even spell very good. And he wrote it right on the wall. My wife was really pissed about that, but he just wrote the whole prayer down on that wall. And he said, this is what I want you to do for 1 year. He said, every morning in the 11th step, when it says you consider your plans for the day, I want you to ask the Creator to allow you to experience something in this prayer. I want you to not know, let me love instead of being loved. Let me experience that. Every day I was to do that. And that I'll never do that again. That was the most painful, difficult going through the work, that I did, is because it's sort of like you're in a bag of shit and somebody comes along and they're telling you this little bitty weird ass story and there's nothing. And you got this big problem going on and you can't share it. You got to shut up and pay attention, to let them share that little pissant story or whatever when you're dying inside, and it's a painful thing to do. But this is what he did. And so every year, step 2, he would help me remove blockages that just him and his wisdom of the old man that he knew, what it was I was to work on, for 1 year. And so that's kind of my experience is I got the emotional sobriety by the cycle of life teachings, by going back and by building the trust and building, I don't have feelings of being good for something, being good for nothing. I used to have those. That was the way of life. That's not how I am today. It's a way different world, thanks to the program and the steps that you guys have given me. So with that, I would just close my remarks here on the emotional sobriety. Is there something else I'm supposed to do?
No, man, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. So the next thing is usually call on just 2 people. Can you see on the screen, Don?
Yeah.
We got about 20 more minutes. Can you call on 2 people and then we'll open it up?
I want to call on Linda and I want to call on Gary B.
Okay.
So Linda,
take it away.
Hi, I'm Linda Allanon. Thank you, Don. It's always such a joy to hear you, and you always say so much. Every time I hear you, I hear so much, and I love the fact that us Allanons, we try so hard until we get to program and stop trying, and that's when we get the credit for everything. So, but what I really appreciate you talking about, and I've heard you talk about it before, and I was going to ask if you could share a little bit on it now, is forgiving the unforgivable.
Okay. When I worked with Johnny Lookencloud on this, we're actually working on the sexual abuse. That was so devastating, the sexual abuse, and I considered one of the forgiven the unforgivable. And what I really wanted from God was, I say, bring him back alive and give me about 15 minutes with him, then I'll forgive him. But I ain't no little kid no more. And so of course that don't work that way. So when I asked Johnny Lookencloud for guidance on that, he said, there's 3 parts to forgiving the unforgivable. 2 of them you can do and 1 you can't. So that didn't make any sense to me. So I said, well, what does that mean? So he said, I'll give you 1 at a time. I'm not going to tell you all 3. Then he said, you're to do this and come back to me. And if you got it done, then I'll give you the next one. And I always hated him when he would never tell me the whole story, it was like a teaser or something. So he said, the first step to forgiving the unforgivable is you got to realize the event that happened, it's in your head. I said, no, up on the reservation or by Camp 14 Road, he said, no. He said, where it's going on is in your head. I said, no, you're not listening to me. I said, it was back on the reservation, and he'd say, don't talk to me for 30 days. Just don't bother me. But I want you to go up and think about it. So I would go think about it and I'd get angry and upset and all kinds of different stuff until this one day it clicked. And I said, oh, yeah, it is there. I get it, you know. So I went back and I talked to him and I got it. And he said, okay, I'm gonna give you the second one. He said, now, what is in there? He said, there's a story about the event. And he said, you're the author. You wrote the story about what that is in your head. I said, no, no, that's not really true. I said, this is what he did and this is what went on. He said, but you're the author. You wrote the story. I said, no, I did not write the story. And I would just argue with him. And then he'd finally get disgusted with me. He'd say, go away, think about it, 30 days. And he would say stuff like, he said, not only did you write the story, but he said, I bet you added to it. He said, I bet you jazzed it up. And I bet there's maybe some stuff you're leaving out. And that's the way he just had a way of making me really irritated. And so finally, I said, okay, I got what he said. It was my self-talk that I talked about while that was going on, how it was afterwards, every time I visited it. My self-talk was making a story inside of my head about what went on. And so I went to him and I said, okay, I got it. And he said, well, the third one, he said, you can't do. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, okay. And he said, I'm going to build you an altar. What that meant was he made a red cloth and then he took a shell like this and he put cedar and sage and couscous. It's a plant root. And he put it in there and he said, do you remember that place where we did that ceremony up in the mountains? I said, yeah. He said, I want you to go up there. And he said, I want you to take off your shirt and right on the edge of where that rock is, he said, I want you to do the ceremony and this is what you're to do. He said, you're to tell the creator that there's 3 steps that I told you. Step 1, and you did it. There's step 2, and you did that. Then he said, when that is done, you tell a creator, Johnny Looking Cloud told me to tell you this, because I was really new in recovery, you know, so he had to give me very special instructions. He said, you got to use this name. You got to say, you can't say creator, you got to say Holy Spirit. Now, Johnny Looking Cloud was a traditional man, knew the culture, ceremonies, the songs, but he also was a devout Catholic. He was both, but he didn't see it as separate. In his growth, it was all one. It wasn't separate things. But he said, don't say God, don't say the creator, you got to say Holy Spirit. And he said, you ask the Holy Spirit to give you a new story. He said, you cannot write the story that you need to forgive. Only the Holy Spirit can give you that story that will allow you to be able to remember what happened, but the story that will allow you to forgive. And that's what I did. And I just said it that simple. I was so early in sobriety. I said, okay, Johnny Looking Cloud, this is what he told me I'm supposed to do. He said, I can only say Holy Spirit, but he said, you're a helper. And he told me that if I asked you to come give me a story, that you would give me that story that I can forgive that man for what he did. And that's what happened. I was given that new story and I was able to go back to his gravesite, back on the reservation, and say those words that I needed to say. Never have a bad feeling about it since. And I can share it. I can share what happened. Before I couldn't share nothing about it. But that's what he taught me about forgiving the unforgivable. 3 parts, 2 we can do, 1 only the Holy Spirit can do. And I don't understand, I don't try to figure it out. I learned that working with the elders, when they tell you to do something, just do it. Don't analyze it, just do it. But that's my experience with that. And I did it 23 times after that. I used that process of, I had done so much damage and so much hate and things that I learned I could do that every time. I still do that today when I get one of those burners, you know, where I get locked in, I can't, let it go. So that's
One of those murders. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you,
Oh.
Don.
good to see you, Linda. Thank you.
Good to see you, Don. We love you.
All right. Gary
Thank
B.
you.
Don, I was so enthralled with what you were saying and about everything you did. I had the opportunity to be around Johnny Looking-Cod a couple of times over the years, but I don't think he was much interested in dealing with this skinny white boy at that time, but he touched a bunch of us, though, as part of the Denver Young People's Group. And Lee lives in Grand Junction still, and I'll talk on the phone, and he'll remember something Johnny Looking-Cloud shared with him. With that. So, but your message is so wonderful and so complete. You told me I was an elder a few weeks ago, and I was much flattered about it, but you got me beat by a long ways. And thank you so much. It was just super.
Oh, all right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gary. Thank you. Heather?
Hey, I'm Heather. I'm an alcoholic. And thank you, Don. Thank you so much for sharing your story. So I met you 21 years ago, and I heard you speak at a meeting, and I got so excited when Sam said you were sharing your story tonight. And I'm going to try not to get emotional, but you can't help it. It's emotion of gratitude. Your story, when you shared that all those years ago, was like one of the few stories that helped me really have a connection with a higher power. And I have carried your story with me all of these 23 years of my sobriety. And I share it with every woman that I've sponsored, the circle of life and how we go through those seasons. And when finally YouTube came around, I was like, you can find Dawn online and sharing your story that way. And it truly was foundational for me in my early recovery, and so meaningful. And I'm so grateful I get to see you again and hear your story again. I'm actually sitting over here taking notes because I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many things that I didn't even hear when I was so newly sober. Like there were pieces of it. But this was just so beautiful and touching. And you talked about being a peaceful warrior. And right after you spoke those years ago, somebody handed me a book, a non-AA book called The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And it was all tied together. And you've always been in my heart. You've always been a part of my story. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I always say that one of the things that the elder told me one time is he said, tears are the highest form of prayer. Because when you can't think of the words and you can't think what you're supposed to say, what happens is the tears come and the creator goes, oh, I understand, my daughter, what your words are in that. So I learned to cry after hearing that. I don't need to hold back. I used to hold back because guys aren't supposed to cry, whatever that is. But if you ever think about it, tears are the highest form of prayer. So just let them flow. Just pray. It's so good to hear you. What a beautiful young lady you are.
Thank you.
So, Don, are you going to Fellowship of the Spirit this year?
I am.
So, Heather, you and Steve should hook up with that. Anybody here who's really enjoyed seeing Don should go register for Fellowship of the Spirit. It's going to be in person in the last weekend in July. If you've never been, it's in Estes Park. It's an incredible conference. It's my home conference. And then we call on Ed.
Thank you so much for picking me. Thank you. I'm Ed. I'm an alcoholic and an addict. Don, like Heather, this is such a higher powered moment for me. I came on, I saw Don C, and I didn't know which Don C. I hadn't connected with it. I came on and you changed my life. 21 years ago, like Heather, in London, getting clean. Recovery is a process, not an event. Those tapes, the way everything you talked about is the only way I know how to take people through the steps.
Oh.
And I believe in it so deeply. And honestly, you transform my life, and the things you say in those videos, the seasons, the cycle of life, Rin Tin Tin, all that stuff you talked about, the cartoons, the inability to grow up, the tree, the salmon, everything. And hearing you tonight and seeing you, it was so connective. I've had a very difficult time the last 10 years in recovery. I've stayed clean, but I just feel this was meant to be. And you talked about again, forgiving the unforgivable. And I'm going through something in my 20th year of recovery last year. In lockdown, I found out my father wasn't my father. And the father I grew up with was an alcoholic father. So I spent 20 years in recovery trying to forgive a father that wasn't even my father. And then it's literally, what it's shown me, the truth, discovering the truth about the lie, it's that I might never get to the truth. I've only got this moment. So I just keep peeling the layers back, and more is constantly revealed to me. And that's my brain now, I just finish on this, is like I've had a Mac computer that's been running off Microsoft software all my life, and now I've finally got the right software in, but it's going to take a while to load, you know what I mean? And I have to be patient with this process. But listen, this is strange to you for someone who's never met you, but I love you. And I'm so grateful I heard you tonight. And if I could get your number just to connect, even for 5 minutes, that would mean a lot to me. So Don, thank you and God bless.
Oh, thank you.
Emerson.
Hi, Emerson, recovered addict, alcoholic. Don, that was the way I want to say it is, it was absolutely a privilege to hear you. I've never heard you before. My sponsor, right before the meeting, JP said, hey, check this out. And I did. And the odd thing is, I do a lot of meetings on Zoom and stuff, and I've never felt the need to take notes. But even before you began to speak, something told me, get out your notebook, and I have like a page and a half of notes. And especially like, the 8 feelings. And then when you got down near the end and you said, give up the need to know why, that is like what has plagued me my whole, like, I always want to know why, like a little kid, why? And, I drive myself crazy wanting to know why. But sir, it was an absolute privilege to hear you. And I really feel like it was a gift. And like Ed said, I love you for this, man. This was eye-opening. Absolutely. No, it was spirit-opening. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. If you want more details on the cycle of life, there's a site called Sobriety.com. Then the menu item would be Sobriety Teachings. And then you'll see that there's a video there for the cycle of life. There's a lot more details that will make.
Okay.
So welcome to.
It's called Sobriety.
Yeah, Sobriety, not Sobriety. Sobriety.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Stephen, you had your hand up?
Yes, sir. Steve, alcoholic, Phoenix, Tempe area. Thank you so much, Don. I've been following you for God knows how long, since the early 90s. I met you in Scottsdale many years ago when you were taking the hoop around the country. I just want to say that you are so consistent. It's ridiculous. I listen to you as much as I listen to you. It's like I've never heard it before, but I know that your story is just like, it's just so consistent. It's amazing. When you went through the seasons and that kind of stuff, it's just, I'm dividing my age by 4, trying to figure out what's going on with me. And but anyway, thank you so much. I just I'm at a loss for words. And many years ago, you spoke with a friend of mine. His name was Fred Reel. And I think it was in Arkansas in 94, 93, 94, 95. And he gave me your tape. And somebody said, you're always one of the first few tapes that the newcomer gets. Well, you were one of the first tapes that I ever got, and that was before CDs. But the stories are just amazing, and it's just to see just the stories that you tell allow me to see and understand, and it's just really appreciated. Thank you so much.
All
Thanks.
right, thank you.
Hey, Tom and Juanita, we did it. It happened, man. Hey, why don't you guys share real quick?
It's hard to be real quick. Don, you know that you mean the world to us. You know, you're one of the most important people in our lives, and you've done so much for us. It's hard to put into words. But you know, I'm an idiot, and my mind just goes off. And years ago, a lot of years ago, I did a big book workshop at our state penitentiary. I told you this story once, a long time ago. And there was a kid in my group who never said a word. He was a native kid and he never said boo, you know, and I thought he was sitting there just thinking, well, there's this white asshole that's doing this and I'm biding my time, you know. But then it was a therapeutic community and he graduated from it. And they had each one of them say something. Well, he got up and sang the songs from the Sweat Lodge and from the Sundance beautifully, just incredible. I never knew the guy, you know, had it in him. And, you know, I went up to him and told him that, you know, as part of my tradition, and I hugged him and everything. And I said, you know, we have a mentor, this guy, Don Sees in Colorado Springs. And he was influenced by a Lakota guy, big time, this guy, Johnny Looking Cloud. And he goes, what? Johnny Looking Cloud, he's my uncle. He goes, he was an actor and he was a member of AA and he did this and he did that. And he said, you know, I looked up to him my entire life. And I said, well, you come from a fine lineage, boy, you a great tradition, you know. And so just screwing around, I got on the internet now and looked up Johnny Looking Cloud. I Googled him and I found a picture of Johnny Looking Cloud. And it said the Indian Prayer for Peace. And he had signed the thing. And I'm going to try to get it for you and give it to you. But we love you and you know we do. And, you know, I hope we're all traveling together for a lot longer. And thanks for everything, Don.
9 years ago, yesterday, I had been single for a long time, but 9 years ago yesterday, my wife and I got married at Tenambi Pueblo. And I didn't want any of my kids there. You know how that stuff goes. The only ones I wanted there was these two here, Tom and Juanita. They came there with a hoop. And I just love you guys. You're just special as you could be. And I want to thank you for being at our wedding and participating at it. We couldn't have anyone better or stronger than, in my mind, than you two guys. I love you both a lot. Thank you for being there.
That's beautiful. And I think we have, do you have anything, Dom? We usually ask somebody in the last minute. Is there anything that you thought about while people were sharing that you might like to add?
There's this one gentleman, I think he was from Tucson. He was wondering about where he was in the seasons. If you, on YouTube, if you just type in Seasons of Recovery, we made a video about the seasons. I actually was taught the seasons, the Navajos. I went down there for one day and he taught me the season system for 500 years. That's the knowledge, you know, that exists in many of our native communities. So if you want to have an idea, where are you at in the seasons? It starts when you're born, unless you take a third step. Then the Creator gives you a new set of seasons. Your third step will put you in the spring, no matter how big of a bag of shit you're in. You get a chance to get the seasons to start over and be in harmony. So you're welcome to see that. Bye. I just want to thank you for allowing me to come and share. I'm only sharing back what you guys give me, so probably none of it is new, but I want to thank you for my life and for my family and for recovery. And AA is it's grown, and I think we know things that I think the book says that we only know a little. There's more, and I think that some of these things like that comes up in these meetings. There's people that know some of the things that are not in the book, that helps us, gain in sobriety. I've always thought that the recovery movement, this is what's going to change society. I think it's that strong. I don't see anything else on the horizon that I can see that is needed as much as our program to go to help with all the problems that we have now. So thank you very much.
Hey, thank you. And I think, everybody here really loves you. And I'd like to think that there were 215 people on here tonight because of how cool I am, but it's not the truth. And Bill Cleveland, he doesn't normally come. I mean, I'd like to think he was just showing up to look at me and hang out, but, so Belinda, Emily, we don't have time tonight, but we'll do next one. If you guys come on, we'll, next week, if that's okay. And, we'll close the meeting by going to our inner room. We just we mute ourselves and we just say the Lord's Prayer to ourselves for all who care to join us. Thank you. Thank you so much. What an honor and a privilege, Don. We really appreciate your service tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam Glenn. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Love you, man.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Great.